And so I'm going to start with Christopher Thornburg, and this has to do with something that's going to affect real estate, I think. So here's the question. Do you expect the dollar to lose value, and how would the devaluation of the dollar impact interest rates? Pretty easy question, right?
Yeah. Well, there's two sides to that question.
Okay.
Right? Let's first talk dollar, and then we'll talk interest rates.
Okay.
The dollar, remember, one of the things that was generated through this economic downturn through the buildup of this economic downturn was this huge drop in savings and this huge increase in the trade deficit. The trade deficit works in sort of correlation with the dollar. Trade deficit gets wider, you see the dollar go up. Now that trade deficit has to close, and that means the dollar must get weaker. There's very little doubt about that. Now, the second question was, what about interest rates?
Yes.
Now, that is an enormous question because part of that's the dollar, but it's not just the dollar.
Okay.
I mean, there's obviously all sorts of things going on there. Interest rates in general are going to go up. There's no doubt about it.
When?
That's the question, right? You know, I always get that question, when. If I knew that, I wouldn't tell you, Bruce. Look, there's two issues that are going on, right? The Federal Reserve has expanded through this, quantitative expansion, has increased the money supply substantially. The base money supply is up 100%. At some point in time, that's going to start creating inflationary pressures. At that point in time, the Fed has to do one of two things: either sit in the sideline and not start selling off those assets they purchased and allow inflation to kick in. That's going to raise interest rates. Or, alternatively, they're going to fight off inflation by selling off all those long-run securities they bought, and that's going to raise interest rates. So one way or the other, the back end of this thing, you're going to see long-run interest rates start to go up. That means mortgage rates. My argument would be, in the shorter run, it may be politically expedient to allow inflation to kick into the system because that would bail out the asset markets. But for any of you in the room, who was working in real estate in 1982, 1983? What was a mortgage rate then?
18?
18, 17%.
Yep.
And the reason for that, of course, was because of the fear of inflation. Understand that inflation may be politically expedient in the short run, but the long-run consequences on the housing market could be furious.
Okay. Rick, I've got a question for you. Rick Sharga, has the reason changed why people go into foreclosure in 2009 versus 2008? Has there been a change in why that occurs for them?
Not as much as the press would have you believe.
Okay.
I realized last month when I was really starting to analyze the numbers, and when my friends at the MBA actually put their quarterly report out, and I had a chance to do some analysis, the media has jumped ahead to the next wave. We're actually looking at a 3-wave foreclosure tsunami. The first wave started roughly in the first quarter of 2006, triggered by the subprime meltdown, fostered by ARMS that came afterwards. Now the press would like us to believe that all the foreclosures we're seeing right now are driven by unemployment.
Mm-hmm.
The MBA numbers suggested that about 30 to 33% of the new foreclosure activity is unemployment related. I think that's probably right.
Okay.
What that means is 2/3 of the foreclosure activity is not unemployment related. So what we're really seeing is increasing levels of continued problems from the first wave,
okay,
exacerbated by a new wave. The first wave will eventually run out of steam. We're probably close to that happening. The second wave is going to pick up steam. You were asking Chris about employment being a lagging indicator.
Mm-hmm.
Assuming unemployment peaks around the first quarter of next year, we'll probably see the foreclosures related to that peak around the third or fourth quarter of next year,
okay,
which will be just in time for them to be augmented by the next wave, which, with all due respect to our realtor friends, really is going to happen. And it's the option ARM loans that are coming home to roost. I wish to God they weren't going to happen. I would like to get my life back at some point, but when you're dealing with loans that are going to reset on properties that were overvalued at the time, given to people who who basically qualified for no documentation loans, they're going to reset. And in most cases, the people will owe more on them when they reset than they did when they took the loan, not accounting for the depreciation in the value of the properties.
Okay.
These things are going to default like I can't even come up. I can't come up with a good toilet analogy like Chris did.
David, I've got a couple of questions for you. About 50 to 70%, not working? 50% to 70% of loan modifications fail. Why do you think that is? And should principal reductions be part of loan modifications? I think I already know the answer to this one, but
That's another word for cram down, I would think. But I'd like to go back to something that you just said. The lender does have a fiduciary responsibility in that we have buyback agreements, and if we underwrite the loan, you should see how many of those loans are coming back from Fannie and Freddie right now in our face that they're asking us to repurchase. So we do have a fiduciary responsibility. We underwrite it, we fund it, we close it, unlike the brokers who really don't have a fiduciary.
No, that's fair, but
they don't.
But what's the recourse for the buyer in that case? You take a hit, the banker takes a hit. That's fair. But is there a recourse for the buyer in that transaction?
If they committed fraud. And I have a statistic for you that 87% of the loans that are going into foreclosure in this state have fraud committed on them. This state. That should bother you. That means that the loan officer or the realtor, the appraiser, or somebody, the buyer? All knew exactly what they were doing. And I consult for a company that's based here that does fraud detection. I didn't mean to get off on this, but if that's okay.
go ahead.
And when we actually call the borrower and do an interview, and they say, hey, they told me that even though I made $1,500 a month, if I put down $15,000, I know I'm a gardener, but they said to put down that I own a nursery. And when the house goes up in value, they'd split it with me. And that's the kind of stuff that's going on. We do the interview for it. So hold to the number of 87% of fraud, and fraud is still being committed out there on a regular basis right now.
We are asking the system, and we are asking lenders and servicers to use tools in a way they were never designed to be used. Okay, we're trying to build a house with a screwdriver when we need a hammer and saw. We're talking about loan modification programs, forbearance programs, workout programs that were meant, to his point, to be used on a case-by-case basis, and we're trying to turn them into mass market products. And we're looking for President Obama or somebody to wave a magic wand over the whole thing. It's out of pixie dust. People complain about short sales. Short sales were supposed to be a rare occurrence for that unimaginable circumstance where somebody fell on bad financial times at exactly the same time as house lost value. And now we're wondering why we can't ask a single loan officer, a loss mitigation manager, to do 100 of them a day because that's how many files he's getting. It's that the tools were not meant for the volume of activity we're seeing, and the system is broken.
Yeah, Tommy, can you fix that pretty quick for him?
I really think we can.
Yeah.
I passionately believe we can. But you have to arrive at value.
I think you could come up with that almost any day you wanted to.
If you arrive at value, just like the thing that amazes me is probably everybody in this room that is invested in the stock market or has been invested in the stock market, your equity is off at least 30% unless you're very, very bright. And yet, there's nothing you don't think the government should change some sort of modification. They shouldn't come down with a cram down. You don't have any other, you just say, you know what? I made a miscalculation.